Welcome, everybody. We're going to be working on chapter 10 this evening. And chapter 10 is, I'm going to call it mostly an informational chapter talking about some of the, you know, concepts that are related to the greater goal of web development. And let's take a look at some of these learning outcomes here so you see like some of the things that we're talking about. So, for example, one thing is when you're learning how to do this as a profession, um, you often create websites as sort of like a traditional IT project, meaning that we're often using standard project methodologies to drive the project. And the most standard one is the system development lifecycle. And why do companies use these methodologies? We'll talk about that a little bit. Um, Also, there's kind of like this process that you go through when you're building a website project. And we're here to learn code mostly, but we're also here to learn the other important concepts of the web, like how do you actually put your website out on the internet. Like, for example, here at Gateway we have our own web server, but um if I'm not at school, where do I put my web pages, right? And we'll address that. So we'll look at domain names. We're going to look at hosting. We'll look at the types of hosting and way people launch sites. But also, as you're working on projects, you're going to discover very quickly that the coding part is actually maybe the smallest part of the project, right? Um, so there's a lot of other things that happen when you work professionally. And I'm thinking of like an environment where it's like perhaps a marketing firm or a IT company that specializes in building websites, web pages, web applications, e-commerce, or something like that. And they have, many coders and many people that perform many tasks to get that project done. You will often be working on teams that will have all of these roles as part of the project. So I want you to look at this list. So it goes everywhere from the project manager. Somebody's got to run the thing, probably your boss, right? Your supervisor. And then you have somebody who's the information architect that helps with, all right, well, how are we organizing the information to make it work with the application or the website? We have people that are UX or user experience designers that think about what colors you should use and what branding and what fonts and what the screen should look like, the wireframes and all that. uh, and all of these, as you look down the list here, all of these are job positions in this area, right? um, Also, you probably will pull somebody in from marketing. So if you're building a website for somebody, um, it might be part of a bigger ad campaign. Like maybe your firm is not only making a website for this client, but maybe they're also doing print ads and social media ads and other stuff. So marketing is always part of it. There's people that we call copywriters and editors that are basically the people that create the words that go on the page. I'm sure you guys have seen this. Have you ever gone to a website and you look at the content and you go, man, this person doesn't know how to spell, or this person must be an idiot, or something really like that, right? Because that's a skill too. Like the words that your client might give you to put on the website might not be very good, and you might have to alter them, right? So strong English skills are important. I don't grade on this, by the way. So I know some web instructors do. Like you're creating your final project, you better make sure all your grammar and spelling is good on all your pages. I kind of don't care so much, but it is important because people judge you on that stuff, right? Do you want to go to a website and plop down your credit card and buy something if the person can't even spell the thing that you're trying to buy? It makes you a little, weary of it, right? Then you have people that are content managers that look at all the different stuff that go on the site, the images, the videos, the words, the logos, whatever you have that oversees that. You also probably have people that are actually perhaps designing those things. So like the graphic designer might create your logo, or, look at the branding of the company and come up with a color scheme and the hex codes for what colors you should use, right? This is kind of an interesting thought. Also, because you're working with often data-driven websites, especially with content management systems, you usually have database administrators that are working with that piece, especially if the application is robust and requires a database. Most content management systems do, but a lot of that's automatic. And I'm talking about when you're doing a higher level kind of project, like e-commerce is a good example. Often you'll also have network administrators because those servers that run the web pages are connected to networks, and those networks need to be administered. So, for example, here at Gateway, Prometheus sits in a server rack at our IMET campus. Some of you got to see it and go, oh, hey, look, there's Prometheus right over there, right? And it's actually a physical machine, but the network connection that reaches that machine from the outside world, we have people, in our infrastructure team is what we call it at Gateway, that control how that server is accessed. They set the firewall so the network traffic can reach it. They're the ones who register the domain names, in the subdomain. Prometheus is technically a subdomain, right? gtc.edu is really the domain name. Prometheus is a subdomain. And so when you type in that address, it finds Gateway, and then it gets to Gateway, and then, it's like, where's Prometheus? Oh, it's over at IMAT in the server rack in this room on this network port, right? So you need those people. And then they have us, right? At least this is what we think we are. Here's the thing I want to tell you, though. The web developers and designers, the people that do the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, and write the code, are important and often can perform a lot of these other tasks. And while the coding part is really important, understanding all the other stuff is also important. And I think that what really happens is, like, if you do like what I did when I started doing this stuff, I did the projects all on my own. I was all of these people. And real frankly, when I started, I didn't know what I was doing. Real honestly, how did I figure by doing it? And I'm like, oh, that's how it works. It was a whole lot of that, right? One of the advantages that you guys have is you're coming to school and you're talking to somebody that's done it. And this is true with all of our web instructors, by the way. All of us have done a lot of significant work. And you can ask us questions and we'll tell you what works and what doesn't work, or what the practice is, or what the technique is, or what a good possibility is, right? But it's not uncommon, even in design houses or IT companies, that sometimes the person who's the database guy might also be the coder, and the graphic designer might also be the copywriter, and that kind of thing. So roles do get combined, and freelancers know this really well, that sometimes you wear all the hats. And you know what, there's nothing wrong with that, because when you do that, here's what happens: you become a whole lot more employable.
Yeah, you can make a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the goal, and it's not just about the money, but let's face it, folks, most people do not know how to do this stuff. Even the people that think they know how to do it really kind of don't, right? And as you get into it, remember, this is the first course doing web stuff in the program. There's a whole lot more to come, right? This is just the tip of the iceberg. So I mean, people can make a lot of money doing this, but there's a lot of stuff that you have to learn in order to get to that level to make that kind of money. You know, how do you find people to work on stuff? Well, these are some things that you look at, like, what's your experience? And real frankly, in the old days, keep in mind here, a lot of people were doing this stuff without ever having been trained. They just kind of figured it out for however they did, right? They read, they practiced, they learned, talked to people, went to forums, W3 schools, whatever, and figured out how to do it. And that experience over time builds up, so I still get all my old clients often come back to me going, hey, can you do this? Or you can fix that? Can you tell me where I can find this? Or, that kind of thing. And if you're trying to drum up work, especially as a freelancer, or if you're out there looking for a job, your portfolio becomes really important in web, like it does, once again, for an artist or a musician, right? Like, um, I'll put it like this, right? Here, and I think music is a really good correlation because I can take a guy who's been taking music lessons their whole life, right? And can play like some like beautiful Bach masterpiece on the piano or something. And then you put them in front of an audience and people don't like it. And I can take somebody who's only been playing piano for a few months, writes a song that moves people, and they'll buy their record. You know what I mean? And that's the oddity of the web as well. So you can take people that really kind of don't know what they're doing, put websites out there and have them be very successful, or you have people that are, super talented and create content. Right. The idea is to kind of mix that, but portfolio, when you guys go out there looking for work, and I'm just going to tell you this, if you have links on your resume to examples of the work that you've done and it's impressive, people will hire you. They don't care what degree you have, what experience you have. It's true, right? That's how I got a lot of work. The one project, somebody saw it and they're like, we really like it. Can you do that for us? Like, sure, yeah, send me a check. I can do that for sure. But okay, so why study then? Well, the reason to study is because a person like myself can shortcut a lot of the fumbling about looking for information, trying to figure out what the right pathway is. Right. So if I teach you HTML the correct way, if I teach you CSS the correct way and JavaScript the correct way, then when you really try to do work, you have a solid foundation. And once again, comparing it to music, it's kind of like if you learn music theory and learn how to play your scales and practice a lot, then the opportunity comes along to like do some real work, and you have all this underpinning of solid fundamentals to help you along your path. The other advantage of that is you can advance a lot more quickly in your knowledge if you've been properly taught. That's my opinion, right? And if you get the right instructors, especially, I will say that I'm very proud of the people that we have here at Gateway. I was like everybody that's in our web department, that includes Wendy Revolinsky, Christopher Venkis, Christian Herr, and myself. We're the web teachers. I was part of the hiring committee. So basically, I interviewed Christian and Christopher and Wendy when they got their jobs. And you know what? They were all rock stars, and we have their expertise on staff and quality people we can reach out to. And if you ask them, hey, if I was building an app and I wanted to do this or that, what should I do? And they'll give you an answer, and it's probably the right answer, right? As opposed to learning it from somebody on the web that is maybe never done it professionally, or you're reading a book and that kind of thing. Working with people, I think, is really important. It is not unusual though, right? Like, so like if people are doing one aspect of the project, like let's say, for example, you're really good with coding, but you're horrible with graphics. Well, you know what? Maybe you should hire a graphic designer, right? I think that's not a bad idea. They do have this one like bullet here about industry certifications. And in most other IT fields, like if I was in like networking or cybersecurity or help desk or hardware or something like that, certifications are big, right? In web, kind of not so much, real frankly, right? There are certificates out there. You can get certificates in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Most people don't care. They want to see your portfolio, right? Back to the music analogy. Hey man, if the song's good and I like it, I like it. Doesn't matter how it got there. Okay. Once again, the job roles, right, for a project. This is basically the same list as before. I'm not really sure why the person put it in there again. But let's talk about the process of doing a project. And this screen that we see here really is based upon this other methodology. And I'm just going to do this really quickly. And just search this phrase SDLC, which stands for the System Development Life Cycle, that in a traditional sense is a 5-phase project life cycle. And if you look at this goofy little graphic here, it starts with planning, right? No, actually six steps on this one, whatever. 5 is, I think, is the tradition, but And boy, I'm having a hard time reading that because it's so darn small. All right, let's. How do you like that, right? Even that's hard to read. I'm just trying to zoom in on that. Oh, there you go. So planning, start with planning. It's like, hey, I want to build a website, for my whatever, right? Then we go into what we call the analysis phase, or where you're looking at like, well, what kind of things should I do? Should I do static page? Should I do content management? Should I do e-commerce? Should I use like Drupal or WordPress or hand code it or whatever? And you analyze the costs, the advantages, disadvantages. When you finally decide on something, then you go into the design process, right? And the design process is where you kind of think about what you're going to build and build it, and then you put it into operation. That's implementation. Then once it's up and running, you're testing, you're integrating it with other systems, and then ultimately you're maintaining it. So this is kind of like the traditional software development lifecycle. It's used by a lot of areas of IT, by the way, for running projects. It is what we call the waterfall approach to project management, meaning there are these finite steps. We go through them one at a time in this order, and that's how we do it, right? And this is the oldest project methodology for IT, but one that's still mostly used. Really pretty weird. When we apply it to websites, they add a couple more bullets here, right? So they start with an idea, and then they analyze like what is it we need to do, right? They define what they're going to do, and then they get into building it. So I want you to notice that all these bubbles here, one of them is coding, right? Not all 7 or 10 or whatever they are. Then the site's up and running. You test it, make sure there's no problems, right? Then you push it out to the public, and then it's up and running and a live website. And then inevitably you're probably going to find a little tweak here, or you want to add some content or update a page or something like that. That's part of the maintenance phase, including backups and stuff like that. And then eventually, a year or 2 or 5 go by, and you're like, what, our site's looking kind of old. I wish we could blank, blank, blank with the site. And then you reevaluate, and then the process starts over. So it's cyclical, right? So it's not a mistake that it's cyclical. And this is what people go through. Now, this cycle, right, of like having the idea, planning and defining it and designing it, doing it, putting it out there, keeping it running, and then going, oh, let's update it. Think about that. You could apply that to any aspect of IT. Like, for example, I got a laptop sitting here in front of me. I bought this thing. Now I'm pushing on 4 years that I bought this thing. And when I bought it, I was like, man, I was super proud of it. I was like, hey, this is a great machine. It's going to last me a long time. And it has. It's performed really well. Knock on wood, right? That it keeps performing well. But I am getting to the point now where it's like, it's 4 years old. And this is not a bad machine. But, I was I was at Costco the other day, and I was looking at these other machines. And, then you get into this thing that's like, is it cheaper? I could upgrade this. I could up the RAM and add more memory, or put a bigger hard drive in it, or change the video card or whatever. But maybe I should just get a new machine, right? And if you think about it, you go through that same process when you're buying hardware, right? It's cyclical, and that is kind of a thing, right? So you have to start with an idea, right? And when you're working with a client, and when you guys get to my capstone class, which is the last course of the program, we do this for real with real clients, not like pretend ones. We figure out like what website are they building, who is the audience for their website, and all of this stuff. What are your goals for this? Do you want to make money with this? You're just trying to promote something, you're just giving information to people. What are you doing? Right? So you have to have that idea, and your client has to have the idea. And sometimes, real frankly, your clients will come in, they know they need a website, but they don't understand what exactly they need it to do, right? And that's kind of your role to help them. By the way, you start looking at all the things that could happen, right? Like, what do we, maybe you have a specific need. Maybe you're a restaurant and you want to like allow people to order online, right? or whatever. You look at what other people do. So if there's another restaurant in your area competing with you, let's take a look at their website. Maybe we can make one that's better. Maybe our process can be smoother, that kind of thing. So looking at competitors is a big thing. And then you have to also look at the costs. Like, what does it cost on an annual basis to run a website? Heck, what does it cost to build the website? Right? That's not necessarily a small piece of change, right? If you're building a static website, it'll be a lot cheaper than a fully functional e-commerce website with a content management system and a database on the back end. That might also have a mobile version or an app that goes with it or something like that. And you can go from basically a website that costs a couple $1,000s to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. When they built the healthcare.gov website, you know how much money they spent building that thing? You should look it up sometime. I think it's billions. Why? Because they had to integrate it with all these insurance companies and databases. Yeah, somebody look it up and see how far off I am. And then they estimated it would take like a year or two, ended up taking like an extra year or two. It took them that long to build it, right? I don't know if you guys remember that. You guys were probably kids at the time, but yeah, it was kind of a thing. All right. Well, once you have what you're going to do, then you can start designing it.
One
Right?
point seven.
What was that?
1.7 billion.
All right. So I was not too far off.
Yeah,
that's not a small piece of change, is it?
That's expensive.
Right? Yeah. And if you went to the website and looked at it, you go, this cost $1 billion? And it's not what it looks like that costs money, Juan, right? It's the stuff that it does in the background. That's the hard part. Like the databases it connects to, the insurance companies that are connected, all that stuff, right? All right. So you get to the point where you're ultimately designing the website. And like I said, we went through this process, right? Like you pick a theme or a topic, right? And then you start thinking about, well, what stuff do I have where I can build a website? What do I want the website to look like? And you might go as far as creating designs and layouts, right? Like for example, you might wireframe it, right? And I think I gave you guys enough examples of this, but often when I would do freelance projects and I would sit down with the client the first time, I would sometimes very simply with pencil and paper, in the old days, just grab a notebook and a pen and go, hey, I could do this, and I could put your menu over here and your button, your shopping cart there, and your products could look like this. And of course, I wasn't like doing it exactly what it would look like, but the general idea. Or if you're lucky, they can say, hey, I want to do a website that looks kind of like this one. And then you already have a target to shoot for, right? Then when you start building it, well, what coding tools are you using? Where are you putting your files? How are you testing things? All of that stuff is relevant, right? And that's part of the process of what we're learning here. I think you guys are already kind of discovering that you don't have to use any particular product to write HTML code, but there are better products than others. And then sometimes when you get to higher levels of website development, like my capstone students right now, they're not hand coding a darn thing. Well, a couple people are, but they're using a content management system, but they're working on a higher level. So instead of like going into like the style sheet and typing padding 20 pixels, they're in the interface where they can control the padding with a slider or type in pixels or percents or M's or rems or whatever, right? And you can use those higher level tools a lot more efficiently when you understand the code that they're generating. So like when I'm moving my padding slider around in a content management system, I know that's changing my style sheet, right? You get the concept, right? So that is one of the other parts of it. When you're deploying a website, and I do think a lot of web designers fail at this, by the way, is to test. I would always go through the process of whenever I was about to deploy a website. I have, Windows machines, I have Macs, I have tablets, I have phones, I've got game systems, I got new computers, old computers, and I have different browsers on all of those machines. And I look like, especially if it's a big money project, I go on all the machines, all the different browsers, test every single page, make sure it looks good on every device. The last thing you want is like you designed it so it looks good on your Windows PC, and then your client's got an iPhone and it looks horrible. It doesn't work at all, that kind of thing. Um, you have to test, especially I think on different browsers, but also different platforms. The main two platforms these days are basically, and let's call it main three platforms. Windows, right? So regular Windows computer users, you have the people that are on Macs, and then you have the people that are on mobiles, which are either Apple or Android. So maybe we call that four, right? But given the fact that most people are looking at web pages on phones, you have to kind of be a little goofy with it and do stuff like this, where you take the web page and you narrow it up so it looks like a phone and go, oh, does the website work in that space or does it not, right? So I do think that that's really important to test a lot, right? There are some automated testing tools, and this is kind of interesting, right? Like for example, right, like the validators that we've been using on the W3 site, or both for HTML and CSS. Those are for the free for the taking. You can throw your code in there, see if it's okay. There's also other websites and software tools that if you're building, let's say like a 500-page website, you can deploy the piece of software and it'll test every link to make sure all the links are working. Otherwise, who's going to do it, right? Well, you basically is the answer. You also want to kind of do a real world testing scenario. So like you build the site and you look at it a certain way, and then you use it a certain way, how it works. So the way that you test it as the guy who built it might be a whole lot different than the person that might actually use the site. So really good design firms, what they'll do is they'll sit people down with the website and observe them, right? This is really bizarre, but they'll observe like, okay, what did they click on? Oh, okay, what kind of stuff are they saying as they're clicking around? Are they liking it, disliking it? Look at the look on their face. They might even mutter out loud, where the heck is the blank? That kind of thing. Or, man, this looks stupid, or, whatever. You pay attention to that stuff. We call this usability testing. And it's important, right? So you need to have somebody that tests it for real, the way like normal people would use the site, to really figure out if it's good or not, ultimately. Right. So who tests both the user and the client? For sure. And I would say the designers test as well. But I think ultimately you're building the websites for the people that are using the websites. So I think probably the users are the most important piece, right? Because if you're building an e-commerce site to sell a product and nobody wants to click around and buy anything, well, that's a problem, right? You want them to buy stuff. So when you're doing big projects, by the way, often you don't put the site public, or the new version of the site public, or whatever, until the client is ready to release it, right? And so often you might, especially if you're contracted, and you probably should be, until they sign off and say, okay, we're good, the site's live. And then, once it's live, then you're testing again, right, to make sure it works right on the live platform. What a lot of designers do these days is they have what we call staging sites, where the site is live on the web. People just don't know where to find it, so you can see it, try it for real. And then they move the staging site over to the production site, which is the one that the world sees, right? Backups are important, all that stuff. We'll talk about hosting here in a little bit too. No matter what, any website is not one of those things where you can, build the website, put it on a server, and then walk away. It usually is not like that. If it's a website that's got lots of pages and does stuff like, e-commerce or whatever, has some sort of interactivity on it, chances are you're going to be doing a lot of maintenance on it. You'll be doing little tweaks and fixes. You'll be running backups. You'll update content. You'll add pages, whatever. But that's an ongoing thing with websites, right? And so sometimes the job of people like us is to just maintain sites, like, hey, okay, can you tweak this, that kind of thing. Go through the evaluation process too. And when you get to the tail end of that whole cycle, right, especially if the site's been running for a while, you can then sit back and go, this worked really well. This other thing did not. And you know what? It met most of our goals, but not all of our goals. And when we do it next time, I would really like to blank, that kind of thing. And it's not a bad idea. You see these things as you're a website builder, but often, like, if you get a lot of, like, let's say, complaining emails from your users saying, hey, oh my God, I was like checking out and then my shipping didn't calculate right and blah, blah, blah. I mean, you'd want to look at that, right? So listening to your users is very important too. All right. I think we're at the point right now where we are ready for a break, if you guys don't mind. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to pause the recording. All right. As you start working on projects, when you're working on, a site like the one that you've been doing here for this semester, often you can kind of get by, right? And I'll bring up a file folder here so you can see, like, the stuff I've been doing this semester. It tends to be a pretty simplistic file structure. So, for example, when I'm, excuse me, building the stuff for any particular unit, right? I mean, this is the whole website, and this is a superfluous folder that's dropped in there by Dreamweaver, by the way. But basically, all my pages are in the root, right, of my folder, right? All the pages are here. The favorite icon is here. The style sheet is here. So like a majority of the website is just sitting right here in the bottom of my folder. I do have a folder for media, for my videos and audio, and then I have a separate folder for images. But I have done websites, and for example, how many pages do I have right now on my website? I don't know, 7, 6, 5, 6, 7 pages. One of them is a test page that can probably just be, removed. The other one's a thank you page after you get the contact form. So really I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages so far. All right, not a lot, right? But what if you're building a website where, holy cow, you've got 100 pages or 500 pages? Do you want to put all those pages in the root of your folder, right? This is kind of the conundrum. And quickly, I think what you discover is that no, you don't, right? So you might actually start to create separate folders for logically connected content, right? So if you have, like, pages that show products, you might put that all in one folder. And if you have pages that show galleries or something like that, you might have a separate folder for those pages, right? It's just a logical kind of thing. So one thing that a lot of people do struggle with, especially when they start to get a more complex structure, is this concept of, like, how do I link between my pages, right? So for example, if they're all in the same folder, I can just call in the file, because we're sitting in the same folder. I just need the file name to link to it. That's it, right? But what if the file I want to link to is one folder up? Then you use this approach, and I want you to notice this little approach here, which is basically ... and this does come from the Linux world, basically Linux Unix world, where and notice it's not a backslash, Windows people, it's a /. All the operating systems use // except for Windows. And ... is basically a shortcut way to say, go up one folder and then look for the file. And as you guys play with FileZilla, you guys sometimes see that there's, like, that folder at the top that's got a ... next to it. And then if you double click that one, you discover, oh, it takes me one folder up. Yeah, that's where it comes from. But what if, right, like, I'm sitting on a page and then I want to go up a folder, and then look for a different folder to find the file that I'm looking for, then you would use this, right? And that's relative to where you're sitting. So just for example, right, if I'm on the Canyon page right now, which is inside the rooms folder, and that's inside the master folder, and I want to go to index, I would have to say / index, right? And then if I wanted to go to the weekend page from the Canyon page, I'd have to go / to go up one level, and then type events / weekend to get to the weekend page. That's kind of the point of that, right? So this is true with images as well as it is for other things, right? But typically it's HTML pages that you're linking to and from. And if you use like a good IDE, sometimes it will guide you in that regard, like Dreamweaver will do that. But a lot of them, you just have to know this, right? And this is more problematic when you have HTML pages inside of folders as opposed to images inside of folders. But when you get a lot of pages, the folders start to make sense, because otherwise your website becomes unwieldy, basically. Like I said, do you want like 500 HTML files in the root folder? Probably not. It's really hard to manage, right? All right, let's move on to this concept, because this is a really important one. And it's often when you are thinking about building a website from scratch that one of the first things you think about is, okay, I got a new business, I want to put it online, I need a website. You know what? I need a killer domain name. Okay, okay, let's talk about what a domain name is first, right? We've done this before, but I'm going to bring up a web browser here, and I just show you, for example, like if I go to coca-cola.com, right? That's a domain name. I'm not going to press enter on it. I really don't want to go to the website, but the point is that this is what it is, right? And it's, if there's like on Prometheus where we have a subdomain that's a prefix, that's not really part of the domain name. It's like the main, it's the .com or the whatever whatever, and the word that or phrase that comes right before it, that's really the domain name. And so basically the point of this is, when you start a project, that's one of the things that you think about first. So like if I had Ty's coffee shop, I might want to have a domain name that's tyscoffeeshop.com, right? Or something similar to that, right? And this becomes a little bit more challenging, especially if your business has been around for a while and you haven't purchased your domain name. And one of the reasons I use the Coca-Cola one as the example is because when Coca-Cola first got on the web, somebody else, like a private citizen who was a Coca-Cola collector, basically had coca-cola.com. He's like, hey, I'm a collector. Hey, this name's available, I'm buying it, not thinking that the web would catch on and Coca-Cola would eventually want that name. And then they ended up paying big money to the guy to buy it, right? And when I was typing coca-cola.com, did you guys notice that there was like coca-cola.com and coca-cola.com, right? They own both of them because they didn't have the straight coca-cola.com at first, right? How do you choose a domain name? Well, ideally, for example, like if I was McDonald's, I would hope that my domain name is mcdonalds.com, right? I mean, that's like what people think of as a default. And the problem though is, especially with .coms, because that's what everybody wants for their business, is that all the common ones and all the common words and all the common phrases and most of the company names are already taken, right? And so we have, the option then to switch to other, what we call top level domains, right? And these are some of the common ones. So we got .com, .net, .biz, .us, .org. There's also .mil, .edu, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And so when you're shopping for one, you have to do a little bit of brainstorming, right? And think about how you build a domain name. Sometimes people like to make it really verbose. Sometimes they like to abbreviate it. So for example, Gateway's domain name is not gatewaytechnicalcollege.edu. Oh my God, that would be a nightmare to type in the email, right? So somebody made the choice. It's like, all right, it's gtc.edu, and that's what we're going with, right? So sometimes people like use acronyms, sometimes they use hyphens. Um, here it says to avoid them, yeah, but some people still do it. I think that the reality is that most people really don't type domain names in anymore. They search for something, they find the site they want to go to and click on it. I think that's more the reality. But people still want the right domain name for their business, and it makes sense. Here are some of the domain registrars out there, and the reason I bring up this list here, well, partially because it's on the PowerPoint that the author created, but also because these are considered kind of the big three, at least the original big three. When we started out and domain names became public, it was these two, which are really the same company, by the way, that first commercialized it, right? And you would pretty much, that was the only place you could go to buy domain names. It was part of a proxy, basically, because the core domain name servers on the internet reside, or used, I should say, used to reside on the campus of the University of North Carolina. And you would basically, if you wanted to have a domain name, you'd have to go through them, right? And they at first would register the domain names directly. Then they were forced to spin it off to private companies. And then you saw the rise of companies like GoDaddy, for example, which is a really, really big one. Um, and, and now there's many, right? And you don't have to go to one of these to buy a domain name. You can go to, there's so many different places, right? Um, okay, so I'm going to do just a quick little demonstration. And I know that a lot of people use GoDaddy to buy domain names. Why? Because people tell them to, basically. There's a bunch of different services out there. Like I'm going to demonstrate this one here, which is webzoe.net. And I don't know if you guys caught that. The URL changes after you hit the page. And here's kind of the secret sauce. This is my business that you're looking at right now on the screen. One of my little side hustles basically is I'm actually a reseller for GoDaddy. So I have this website. I sell basically GoDaddy services, including domain names. And then every time I turn on a client to this and they buy a product through me, I get a commission, right? And this is a great little side business, by the way. And the reason I even developed this is because when I was first doing projects, my clients would be like, well, yeah, I need a domain name. Where do I go to buy it? Right. And then I would send the business somewhere else. So basically I was doing a referral and I wasn't making anything off of it. Right. And then I realized that, oh, there's reseller programs, right? So like GoDaddy has a reseller program. So I sign up for it. It's not free, right? You have to pay for it. But then every time I would bring them business, every time that client buys a product or renews, I get my commission. And you know what? If the clients are good and their businesses run a long time, every year or every month or whatever, when they're renewing, I see a little money in my bank account, right? And it's a kind of a nice little side hustle business. Uh, One of these like make money while you sleep kind of things, right? I just, pay for the site, put the infrastructure up, and then watch money roll into my account, right? The other advantage is if I'm doing projects with clients, I also have the ability to like admin over their sites through this interface, right? So that I can help them if they have problems. So kind of interesting. All right, but we're here to talk about domain names, and a lot of the places that sell domain names have little interfaces like this. So, for example, if I want to, buy a website, and Juan, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. I'm just going to like search your name here, right? And maybe you like this or maybe you don't, right? But I'm searching. Um, you're probably getting a kick out of this, I'm sure, right? So I used to do this. So I used to take my name and buy it as a .com. I stopped doing that recently. But you never know if you're going to get famous. So like, why not own your name as a
Oh
.com?
wow, it is taken.
Yeah, somebody's already taken it. Now I'm going to guess yours is a pretty common Hispanic name, right?
Yeah.
Alejos, I think, is a pretty common name, and I think Juan's a pretty common name too. I was pretty fortunate because mine, right, is very unusual. And who on earth would want to? Oh, somebody bought it. Okay, interesting. Now I got to figure out who bought it, right? So that's a different thing. But you can come in here, you can buy stuff, um, and what they'll do, right, is if that name is taken, they'll give you alternates, right, and they'll show you what the cost is, and I want you guys to notice what the cost is per year, and a lot of different options, a lot of different options. All right, but what if? Okay, so I'm getting curious here. What if you want to find out who owns that site if somebody already owns it? So I got rid of it and somebody bought it.
Go to who
Apparently, I
is
don't know.
dot. You go to that who is dot was it dot net or something like that?
Yep, precisely. And most of the domain registers will have this service. And you can see I'm hovering over it. And who is kind of like this old like Linux Unix service that you would type in a command line to figure out like who is online or who is this user kind of thing. That's where the acronym comes from. But if you click into a who is service, this is not the only one. Um, I can type that in. So I can type in that domain name and then I can see who owns it.
Now, if they have like a private, like they pay extra for the private information thing, doesn't it block all that and then it puts
It
in?
does. It does. Okay, so like if you don't privatize it, and Juan, that's a really good thing to point out. If I didn't privatize it or it's not privatized, whoever's got it registered, you can see, who you can see their address, their phone number, their email address, etc. But right now, and this is a game that GoDaddy does because I did have it registered at GoDaddy. It expired. I didn't renew it, so they buy it, hoping that you buy it from them. And if I went to GoDaddy to look this up, and I'm going to do this, so watch this happen, right?
It'd be
See if I
expensive.
can, yeah, they're gonna be asking for a boatload of money for it. So
So
let's
that happened to me, and there was a block on it for like I think 3 months in order for it to go back up, and I could rebuy it. And I'm glad no one took my name for the
yeah.
website I built.
Yeah, and this is a game that they do, right? So like they know that like some people screw up and don't renew in time. And just so you guys know the way it works is once it expires, you have 30 days to renew. If you don't do it within 30 days, it goes up for public sale. But a lot of what's been happening is like what GoDaddy does, because I know that um, you know, GoDaddy is the one that owns it right now. They're kind of banking on the fact that I'm like, oh shoot, all right, oh man, normally I pay $20, but it looks like I got to pay a broker fee of $70, and then I'll probably have to pay a fee to buy it. Right, it's a game that they do, so I'm not really eager to rebuy it. But I have been on the other end of the spectrum where there was a name that I was looking for. It was I would go to the website. Like if I type this in and see if there's a website attached to it, I highly doubt there is, right? Oh, it's still okay. It's still going to me. Okay, whatever. Um, right, that, and I don't know if this is coming up for my cache, honestly. Anyhow, whatever. But I watched the name expire and then I stalked it basically. I looked at the expiration date. I knew there wasn't a site up on it. And the moment it came up for sale, like I kid you not, like 12:01 a.m. or whatever, I bought it, and then got the name that I wanted for my business. But this is a whole process. So putting a website on the internet, you do need to have a domain name. And that's often where we start is by finding that awesome domain name that matches your business. One example I often give to my students is when I had a group of students that was working on a client project as they were finishing their degree, and the lady, and I don't know if she still has her website up, so I'm going to search on the way dot cafe, right, is the website name. Let's see if it loads. All right, some sort of problem there, but it looks like the name is still taken. But what she wanted to do, the owner of this business, is she wanted to have on the way cafe.com, right? Because everybody wants the .com for their business, right? Take a look at what they're asking for it, right? Like 20 $200, folks, $2,300 really. And then $24 a year after that. But if you wanted to buy it, you could, it was up there, you could buy it, right? If you had the money to buy it. Um, but who wants to pay that kind of money? So it took a little bit of coaching, but what I coached her to do is basically buy this name because they came up with these new top level domains. And so I'm going to do this really quick. We're going to do this search here, and I'm not going to any of the sponsored sites. I'm going to Wikipedia, right? By the way, when the internet first started out, we had what we call the basic top level domains, which were .com, .org, .net, .int, .edu, .gov, and .mil. Later on, they added some others. But what's happened subsequently is they've come up both with two-letter international domain, so every country on the planet. Oh, this is proposed. All right. This is the one I'm looking for. But every country on the planet has a two-letter top-level domain available only to websites that come from that country. So every country on Earth is represented here, right? For the US, it's .us. For Canada, it's .ca. For China, it's .cn, etc. Right. But a lot of people don't like those, right? So when they started running out of .coms, what they started doing is they allowed people to come up with custom top level domains like these. Not everybody sells them. And if you have enough money, you can create one yourself. You just have to pay the big money. It is a bunch of money. I forget what it is, but it's a lot. But you can basically have it be dot whatever the heck you want. Right. And you can see some of the weird ones that are out there. And so when I saw this, that's when I'm like, well, you can't get .com, but you can get on the way .cafe, and why not? Right. And that's ultimately what the client did. Right. So I think that that's kind of a neat little example, but you have to shop for a domain name. And then often what happens after that is you get the domain name registered, and then you need to have a place to have it point. So in other words, you buy the name and you have to renew this on an annual basis, but then you need somewhere to put your website. Like we're putting ours on Prometheus, our own school server, but when you do it for real out on the internet, you have to find web hosting from somebody, right? So you often pay for hosting, and very often, by the way, and even the site that I run here, WebZoe, I'll sell you a domain name and I'll sell you the hosting too, right? And a really common level of hosting, especially if you're running on a Linux server, is cPanel hosting. A lot of hosts offer this, and you can see like the rough prices, like what it costs per month. And you also see the features of what it gives you, right? And I'll have you consider, right? You can do a really cheap basic one, right? One website, 30 gigs of storage, no bandwidth limits, no databases or email accounts, though, right? You go up to the economy level, they give you more space, email accounts to go with it, and 10 databases if you need them, right? Then you can go up a few more bucks a month. And then I want you to look at this, right? So, like, if you're a web developer, that level of service makes a whole lot of sense because you can load up unlimited websites. So you can take on client work, put them on your own hosting, and then have them pay you for hosting, right? That's one of the things. And there's different levels, right? So this is what I would call basic Linux hosting is what you're seeing here, which is the most common kind of hosting on the internet, by the way. You will see there's customized hosting for WordPress, if that's the thing you want to do. So a lot of people do have WordPress websites, but there's also what we call virtual private servers, where you can get a whole machine dedicated to you and you can use it any way you wish. That's, I'd say, much higher level, by the way, but people do that, right? And think about this, right? Like you can get a machine that's connected to the internet where you can load up anything you want on that machine,
Yeah.
right?
I want to ask, do you know if it's possible? So, for example, say you're getting your hosting from like a Weebly or a WordPress, and they only offer so much storage you could actually pay for. Are you able to still get your hosting from that company, but buy storage from a different, from like Amazon to, for that specific
Yeah.
website? Is that
Yeah, I
possible?
mean that, Juan, that's totally doable. Absolutely. And a lot of people do that. Um, I would have you consider though that if your hosting platform is giving you a limit and you're hitting that limit, you might want to consider switching hosts,
Okay.
right? Because some of them, and not that I'm trying to push my services, but like for example, unlimited space, unlimited websites, unlimited bandwidth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's $11 a month. Right. All right. So yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to every service. I like, I use mine as an example because I know it well, and I can show you stuff. Um, but if you start shopping around for domain names and hosting, I'm just going to give you a fair warning. It is a deep rabbit hole because it's not like the old days where there were like two or three people selling them. Now there's hundreds of thousands probably that are selling the same services. And here's kind of the secret sauce. Most of them are resellers. There's still like maybe like 10 major players, something like that. And they're selling their services to others who resell them to others. It's kind of like a pyramid scheme or something in a way, but it's a thing, right? Um, I'm full disclosure with my clients. I tell them, I'm a reseller for GoDaddy. So we're running on top of GoDaddy. One of the reasons I push it is because we actually have phone support. So if you got a problem, you can talk to a real human being, and by the way, web developers, one job you can pick up along the way if you're a freelancer is to be a support person for services like this, right? To help people when they're spinning up their websites and they don't know what to do. This aspect of working with web can actually get highly technical and complicated, right? And when we're teaching you guys here how to create websites, we're teaching you how to code, you know. We're not necessarily teaching you the nuances of how to operate these systems. The only place where we really cover this right now is in our capstone class. When you get to the end of the program and you take the web project management course, I think it's called, it's almost always taught by me, by the way. And we get a client that comes in and they don't have a website and they don't have hosting. We do the whole thing, right? And we do it for real, not pretend. We really buy the domain names. We really set up the hosting. We install the software. We get the sites loaded up, all that stuff, right? And this is the stuff that you hardly ever learn in school, right? But when you're out there doing it for real, it's a thing you have to do all the time. And so this is an area of study. What I do discover with a lot of people is they usually find a provider that they like whether it's like Bluehost or HostGator or one in one or Wix or Weebly or Squarespace, or any one of these like hosting providers, and then they tend to stick with it, right? Um, I've done the same thing. This is not actually where I host most of my stuff. I use a service called webmasters.com. Um, I've been with them, I don't know, 25 years now, maybe a little longer. And I've been very happy with them. They're a little unusual in how they operate their company. In other words, they don't have what they call cPanel hosting. They have a custom control panel, but the cost of the services is good. The reliability is great. Whenever I've had a problem or had an issue, they were always on point to help me. Um, and I just like them, right? And I don't, and like once you're like on a service and you're always renewing it, you tend not to mess with it, right? The level of hosting that I do get is this one here, which is the business hosting. And notice unlimited domains, unlimited disk space, unlimited data transfer, yada 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 yada, right? um, and once again, if you're a web designer, having unlimited domains and disk space and all that stuff is really kind of good because then you can load up as many websites as you want with no limit at all, right? So sounds wonderful, right? um, okay, so that's kind of the quick lay of the land with domain names and hosting. Um, there are different levels of hosting. Real frankly, most of the hosting plans that we looked at is fall into this category. By the way, we call it virtual hosting. Uh, Believe it or not, Prometheus is a virtual host. Okay, so what does this mean? That means that somewhere out on the internet, there's a computer system. Well, we know where Prometheus is, it's in a lab, but there's a server, it's a physical computer that's sitting there. That physical computer is running a host operating system, is what we call it. And in our case, we use VMware ESXi, which is their virtualization platform. And that's really the operating system that's on that server. And then that operating system allows me to create a virtual server. It's not an actual server. This is where it gets bizarre. It is a virtual machine. So it's a simulation of a computer running on top of a computer that runs my web hosting software that allows you guys to connect to it and upload your stuff to Prometheus. So when you're connecting to Prometheus, you're connecting to a virtual machine. You're not connecting to an actual physical machine. That virtual machine resides on a physical machine, but there's a bunch of reasons for doing this, right? And from the hosting standpoint, that virtual machine basically exists as a collection of files that I can pick up and move to other virtual hosts and spin it up or give it more memory or more storage or whatever. And I'm on a different platform and I'm up and running. Um, Virtual hosting also has the advantages that it's much easier to back up. It tends to be more stable. And almost everybody on the internet that's running websites is doing it this way, right? So the stuff that we connect to on the web is not really connecting to a computer. This is really weird, right? Conceptually, once you learn really what a virtual machine is, it makes a whole lot more sense, and you guys will learn that as you kind of press through the program. But basically, a virtual machine is when you can run a different operating system, a simulated computer system on top of a real computer system, right? A lot of reasons for doing it. And the other thing is when you do virtual hosting, often even that virtualized hosting machine is running not just your website, but maybe like 100 other websites too, right? And that's all kind of controlled by your hosting provider, how they orchestrate all that. If you want a machine that's dedicated to you, you can do that, right? And that's coming up on the slide following this one. When you are looking for hosting, these are some of the different things that you look at. Like if like for example, you're building a WordPress site which runs on PHP and MySQL, and the version numbers of those pieces of software that you need, then you can check with your host. Do you guys run, PHP? Is it PHP 7 and MySQL version 8? Right? Those are the kind of the modern standards, I think. And are you running Apache or are you running Nginx for your web server? It's like really weird questions like that. If you do Windows web development, right? Like for example, with ASP.NET, well, then you need to find a Windows hosting provider, right? Because otherwise your .NET websites won't run on top of Linux, at least not correctly, typically, right? So those are things you consider. If you start shopping around, you'll see that a lot of companies do really goofy things like this. And I'm going to hit HostGator because I know, for example, let's go to their main site. Like if you, for example, if you want to get a website up, right, and they have like all these like really cheap prices, right? It's like web hosting includes a free domain. It's only $375 a month, but please notice the asterisk, right? Which means that's the introductory sale price. After that, it goes up. I don't know what the regular price is. You probably have to click through to see that, but most of the hosting providers do that. They'll give you a loss leader price, and they're telling you 66% off. Normally, it's higher priced. And notice the renewal price is $10.99 per month, right? So the first month might be this cheap, but after that, you got to pay for it, right? And the domain is free for the first year, but after that you got to pay for it, right? And all those things. There's also add-on services. So for example, like Juan mentioned, you might want to make your registration information private so that people aren't spam calling you and emailing you, right? The other thing that you typically need these days is an SSL certificate, so you can get the little lock up here saying that your connection is secure, unlike the one that you saw on my website, which says not secure because I'm not willing to pay the price for it, right? And I don't care, right? I know it's okay, but uh, that's an extra cost too, right? All of those things add up when you're shopping around. So that's why you have to shop around a lot, because your needs might not be the same as somebody else's. And like I said, you can literally spend weeks like researching this stuff and going, well, I found this guy that the hosting is this much, domain names are that much, SSLs are that much, the renewal costs, you like make a spreadsheet of it all. Believe me, I've done that process. And then I just kind of like let go of that a little bit. A little thing. When I'm out like looking for services, I know the one that I'm reselling are good services, and I know the one that I'm using is a good service. So I just go to those, right? And if I find somebody else that is significantly cheaper and better, I'd consider switching, but I haven't found that, right? Most of them tend to be about the same price. And then when you learn the game that most people are resellers, it's probably running on, Amazon or GoDaddy or one of those big services anyhow, right? So that's kind of the rabbit hole you go down. Um, you can do different types of hosting though, like the virtual hosting, which is the typical kind that we're seeing prices for right now, are pretty affordable. But if you wanted, you can actually get a whole machine dedicated to yourself, and then you can do whatever the heck you want on that machine, including hosting a website or storing files or whatever, running applications. It doesn't really matter. And this is a big thing that's happening too. So like big organizations are often buying server time on hosts rather than buying the equipment. Like we have Prometheus loaded on top of a physical server because Gateway owns the server, right? So, hey, we have the gear. Let's load the stuff up and we'll just run it ourselves, right? That's what you can do that. And I believe it or not, I used to do that. And it is possible even, and this is strange, but if you have a Mac or a Windows machine or a Linux machine that's just a desktop or a laptop, you can configure it to be a web server, right? And if you know how to set the settings in your firewall and routers to allow the traffic from the outside world to get to your machine, you can run websites right from your own computer. It's totally a thing, right? Do I recommend that? No, right? Because then you also become a target for attacks, by the way, right? And when you buy from a hosting company, they have mechanisms in place that help to prevent that. They do automatic backups, they have firewalls, they have virus software, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but the fact that you can do this, right? And a lot of companies are moving away from what we call on-premise hosting, which means they physically have the machine in their building on their premises, to cloud computing where they buy or rent a server in a data center somewhere that's dedicated to them, and they have complete access to it. And often what they find is it's a lot cheaper to rent the machine from somebody else than to buy the machine, and then also probably have a person or two that have to run the machine that you got to pay a salary to, right? And then when you look at the cost of a dedicated server being, a few $100 a month, like, oh, that's a bargain. What does the server cost? Like 25K, usually as a starting point. So yeah, that's kind of a thing. So you can have servers that are dedicated exclusively to you. You can also have what we call co-located servers, right? And I think that this is a really common approach as well, right? But this is on the server level, not just running a website, right? You're running the whole operating system. But for most of us, and even real large companies tend to go with virtual hosting because it's the most affordable, it's scalable, right? And basically what that means is, depending on what company I buy the service from, let's say I'm at a certain level of service and I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting so much traffic. I need a better hosting plan. Most of the companies that you'd be dealing with probably have a higher level that they can sell you, right? They'll give you more bandwidth, more storage, more um, stuff, basically, by just upcharging. They'll even give you more bandwidth or put you on a computer with faster CPUs or more storage or whatever. And you just pay more money. One interesting example, I think, is like, for example, when the NFL runs their website, and I think we've talked about this maybe a little bit. Um, when we're in the off season, so the Super Bowl's over, like not a lot of people are really hitting the NFL website. I happen to know that they host it on the Amazon platform. So they can go in to their Amazon control panel. There's actually a control panel for them. And they can say, well, this is how much traffic we normally get during, March. So we can turn the service down a little bit and save a little bit of money. Then the season kicks in and they ramp it up. And then the Super Bowl comes and then they buy extra services because, oh my God, everybody's hitting the website, right? And that's the beauty of the virtual host, is you often have a control panel where you can just up the service, even just for a short period of time, to accommodate the traffic overflow. Websites that fail to do that, so like if the NFL didn't scale up during the Super Bowl, chances are on the day of the Super Bowl, their site would just crash, right? They would get so much traffic, it couldn't handle it and it would shut down even, right? So that's kind of a thing. But these are things that you look at, right? I think a big issue, real frankly, is the technical support, because when you're dealing with complicated technology, and this is complicated technology, something goes wrong, it is really nice to have a good support team to help you out. And for my money, a website that has a phone call, I mean, they can talk to a person, right, to really explain the question, as opposed to talking to like a chat bot or chatting with somebody for support, it makes a really big difference. It really does. So I really suggest shopping around and checking like reviews, or talk to people that have worked with the service and what do they think of it, right? Um, and when people are unhappy, I will tell you, they will tell you, hey, don't use this service, man. They're horrible. It's really expensive. I wanted to add some disk space, right one, right? And they're asking for this much money. I'm like, holy cow, that's a lot of money. I don't want to move my website, but I guess I have to, that kind of thing. Um, so it helps
That's
to
true.
ask around. People will share, like other web developers that you might know will share, and maybe even people here in the class. So Juan, it sounds like you've already delved into this, so and I appreciate that you have a little bit higher level of knowledge on it. But ultimately, we're wrapping up here, so I'm gonna kill the recording, so the lecture is over. And then